Story 1. It was a chilly October evening when Bree, a college student trying to make ends meet, decided to pick up a few extra bucks by driving for Uber. She had heard her fair share of strange stories from fellow drivers, but nothing could have prepared her for what was about to happen. As Bree navigated the dimly lit streets, her phone pinged with a new ride request. The pickup location was listed as an old, abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. It was the kind of place that sent shivers down your spine just looking at it, but money was tight, and she couldn't afford to be picky. She pulled up to the warehouse and checked her rearview mirror, half expecting to see a group of pranksters ready to jump out and scare her. But there was no one in sight. Bree hesitated but decided to follow through with the ride. She needed the money. The app displayed a message: "Your passenger will be waiting inside the warehouse. Please proceed." Nervously, she parked her car and cautiously entered the eerie building. The air was thick with a musty, unsettling odor. Her footsteps echoed ominously through the empty space as she made her way deeper into the warehouse. Finally, she spotted a figure standing in the shadows. It was a tall man, dressed in a long, dark overcoat that concealed most of his features. He was eerily still, like a statue. Bree couldn't see his face, but something about him sent a chill down her spine. "Are you my Uber passenger?" she asked, her voice quivering. The man nodded slowly, and his voice, low and raspy, sent shivers down her spine as he replied, "Yes, I am. Please take me to my destination." Bree led the mysterious passenger to her car, trying to shake off the unease that had settled in her gut. He climbed into the back seat without a word, and she couldn't help but glance at him in her rearview mirror. His eyes were hidden in the shadows, and she couldn't make out any distinct features. She started the car and began driving, following the GPS directions that led them further away from the city and into the desolate countryside. The only sound in the car was the hum of the engine and the occasional eerie creaking from the men in the back seat. As they approached a narrow, winding road through the woods, Bree's unease grew. The darkness seemed to close in around them, and she couldn't shake the feeling that they were going deeper into the unknown. She glanced at the GPS and realized they were off the beaten path, far from any recognizable route. "Sir, are you sure this is the right way?" she asked, her voice trembling. The men didn't respond, and Bree's anxiety continued to mount. She reached for her phone, ready to call for help, but before she could dial, the man's voice filled the car again, chilling her to the bone. "Do not deviate from the path, driver," he said, his words slow and deliberate. "Continue on." Terrified, Bree followed his instructions, her heart pounding in her chest. She had no idea where they were going or what this man's intentions were, but she was trapped in this nightmare ride. As they continued down the winding road, the surroundings grew darker, and Bree's anxiety reached its peak. Suddenly, the men in the back seat began to speak in a language she couldn't understand. It sounded ancient, unnatural, and sent a shiver down her spine. The road ahead seemed to stretch endlessly into the darkness, and Sarah couldn't see any signs of civilization. She was overcome with fear and desperation. She needed to escape this terrifying situation. In a moment of sheer panic, she slammed on the brakes, causing the car to screech to a halt. She turned around to confront the men, demanding answers. But when she looked into the back seat, he was gone. The car's interior was empty. Heart pounding, Bree stumbled out of the car, her breath visible in the cold night air. She frantically searched the surrounding woods, but there was no sign of the mysterious passenger. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. Bree eventually made her way back to civilization, shaken and terrified. She reported the bizarre encounter to the police, but they could find no record of the ride request, and the warehouse on the outskirts of town was abandoned and empty when they investigated. Haunted by the experience, Bree stopped driving for Uber and tried to move on with her life. But the memory of that night continued to haunt her. She couldn't shake the feeling that she had encountered something otherworldly, something that defied explanation. Over the years, she heard whispers of other Uber drivers who had similarly strange and unsettling experiences. Some claimed to have picked up passengers who simply disappeared from their cars, while others spoke of eerie destinations that seemed to exist in another realm. As Bree delved deeper into these stories, she realized that they all had one thing in common: the mysterious passenger who had vanished without a trace. She couldn't help but wonder if she had unwittingly become a part of something far more sinister and supernatural than she could have ever imagined. To this day, Bree refuses to drive for Uber, and she warns others to be cautious when accepting rides from unknown locations. The memory of that chilling night still lingers, a reminder that sometimes the scariest stories are the ones that happen in the real world, where the line between the ordinary and the supernatural is thin and easily crossed. Story 2. The rain had been relentless all evening, creating a symphony of relentless drumming on the roof of my apartment. I was already late for my friend's birthday party, and the thought of braving the weather on my bicycle was out of the question. So, I reluctantly pulled out my phone and summoned an Uber. Within minutes, a black sedan pulled up to the curb, and I dashed out into the storm. The driver's name on the app read Elijah, and the profile picture showed a middle-aged man with a friendly smile. I opened the door and hopped into the back seat, hoping for a warm and uneventful ride. Elijah turned around and greeted me with a nod, his face partially obscured by a baseball cap. "Hey there. Heading to the Greenwood Lounge?" he asked. "Yeah, that's the place," I replied, trying to make myself comfortable as the raindrops continued to pelt the windows. Elijah put the car in gear, and we started moving. The ride began quietly, with only the sound of the rain to keep us company. I settled back into the seat, staring out at the wet streets passing by. Minutes turned into a half hour as we navigated through the city's labyrinthine streets, and I began to feel a growing sense of unease. It wasn't the rain or the late hour that bothered me, but something about Elijah's demeanor. As I glanced at him in the rearview mirror, I noticed his eyes never seemed to leave me for long. They were piercing, like they were trying to read my thoughts. I shook off the sensation, convincing myself it was just the product of a long day and a vivid imagination. We finally arrived at the Greenwood Lounge, the neon sign casting an eerie glow on the rain-soaked pavement. I fumbled for my wallet, ready to pay and put an end to this strange ride. But Elijah turned around, his smile now stretched unnaturally wide, revealing teeth that seemed too sharp for a human. "Enjoy the party," he said in a voice that sent shivers down my spine. I handed him the fare, stepped out of the car, and watched as he sped away into the night. His taillights disappeared around a corner, and I couldn't help but feel relieved that the unsettling ride was over. Inside the lounge, the birthday party was in full swing. I put the bizarre encounter with Elijah out of my mind and joined my friends in celebrating. Hours passed in a blur of laughter, music, and alcohol, and it wasn't until the early hours of the morning that I realized I needed to call another Uber to get back home. This time, the driver's name was Sarah, and her profile picture showed a cheerful young woman with auburn hair. I sighed in relief, hoping for a more pleasant experience than the one earlier in the evening. When the car arrived, I got in, and Sarah greeted me with a warm smile. "Hey there. Where to?" she asked. I provided my address and settled into the back seat, grateful for the contrast between Sarah's friendly demeanor and Elijah's unsettling presence. The rain had finally subsided, leaving a misty sheen on the streets as we began our journey home. As we drove, Sarah engaged me in pleasant conversation, asking about my night and sharing stories of her own experiences as an Uber driver. Her easygoing nature helped me forget the strange encounter with Elijah earlier, and I found myself relaxing in the comfortable atmosphere of her car. However, as we approached a dimly lit stretch of road, a flicker of unease returned. I couldn't put my finger on it, but something about the atmosphere seemed off. I glanced at Sarah, who was now humming a tune to herself, seemingly oblivious to any tension in the air. Then, I noticed it, the road seemed to stretch on endlessly, with no familiar landmarks in sight. Panic began to creep in, and I checked my phone's GPS, which displayed an unsettling message: "No GPS signal available." I tried to keep my cool, assuming it was a technical glitch, but my heart raced. Sarah, I think we might be off track. Can you check the GPS? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Sarah's humming stopped abruptly, and she turned to me, her smile now gone. Her eyes were cold and calculating, and I felt a shiver of dread wash over me. No need for GPS, she whispered, her voice carrying an eerie hollowness. We're exactly where we need to be. My mind raced, and I knew I had to get out of the car. I fumbled for the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. The locks had engaged, trapping me inside with this strange and menacing driver. I began to pound on the window, screaming for help, but the sound seemed to vanish into the void outside. Sarah's demeanor grew increasingly sinister, and she turned to face the road again. In the distance, I saw a flicker of movement, a procession of shadowy figures emerging from the mist, their forms twisted and unnatural. They encircled the car, their eyes glowing with an eerie light. "Welcome to our world," Sarah hissed, her voice now filled with malice. The figures closed in on the car, their bony fingers scraping against the windows. I was trapped, surrounded by an otherworldly nightmare. Desperation coursed through me as I searched for any means of escape. Then, a blinding light pierced the darkness, the headlights of another vehicle approaching from behind. The figures recoiled, hissing and screeching, and Sarah let out a blood-curdling scream. The new arrival swerved past us, and I caught a glimpse of the driver, a familiar face. It was Elijah, the driver from earlier, and he was grinning maniacally as he passed us by. The figures scrambled to get out of his way, and he vanished into the mist, leaving Sarah and me behind. With a deafening roar, the figures dispersed into the darkness, their haunting presence fading like a nightmare upon waking. The locks on the car suddenly released, and I flung open the door, stumbling out onto the rain-soaked pavement. Sarah lay slumped in her seat, her eyes vacant and lifeless. It was as if the malevolent spirit that had possessed her had been exorcised. I stumbled away from the car, my heart pounding, and watched as it slowly faded into the mist, leaving no trace of its eerie occupants. I never used Uber again after that night, and I never saw Elijah or Sarah, or whatever had taken control of them, again. To this day, I can't explain the bizarre and terrifying encounter I had that night, but I know one thing for sure: there are places in this world where the boundary between reality and the supernatural is thin, and sometimes, when you least expect it, it can shatter with bone-chilling consequences. Story 3. The night had descended upon the city like a shroud, cloaking everything in darkness. Rain lashed against the windows of my apartment, its relentless patter a symphony of solitude. I had just moved to the city for a new job, and the unfamiliar surroundings weighed heavily on my nerves. That's why I decided to celebrate my first weekend in town with a night out, despite the inclement weather. I tapped my smartphone screen, summoning an Uber to whisk me away from my quiet apartment and into the heart of the city's nightlife. The app quickly found a driver, and a car icon approached on the map. "Your Uber will arrive in 3 minutes," the app informed me. I checked my reflection in the mirror one last time, smoothed my damp hair, and grabbed my jacket before heading downstairs to the building's entrance. The night air was cold and wet, the scent of rain mingling with distant echoes of laughter from nearby bars. My phone buzzed, signaling the arrival of my ride. I turned to see a sleek black sedan parked at the curb. The rain-soaked city glistened on its glossy surface. The car's headlights illuminated me, revealing a placard on the dashboard with my name. As I approached the vehicle, the driver's window slid down, revealing a face obscured by shadows. The driver spoke, his voice low and gravelly. "You must be Michael. Hop in." I nodded and opened the door, settling into the back seat. The car's interior was dimly lit, giving it an air of mystery. The driver's face remained in the shadows, and I couldn't make out any details. The only thing I noticed was a faint, strange smell that seemed to linger in the car. "Where to?" the driver asked. "The Crimson Bar on Elm Street," I replied, giving the address. The driver didn't acknowledge my request, he simply put the car in gear and began to drive. The journey started out uneventful. Rain drummed on the roof of the car, creating a soothing rhythm that almost made me forget my initial unease. I tried to make conversation with the driver. "Have you been driving for Uber for long?" I asked. There was a pause before he answered. "Long enough to know the city's secrets," he said cryptically. I couldn't help but shiver at his response. The cityscape passed by in a blur of neon signs, flickering streetlights, and the shimmering reflections of rain-slicked roads. It wasn't long before I noticed something odd. The same landmark seemed to repeat itself at irregular intervals. A dilapidated old building with broken windows and graffiti-covered walls. It was as if we were circling around it, again and again. "Is everything okay?" I asked, my unease growing. The driver didn't answer. Instead, he continued to drive in silence, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. Panic clawed at the edges of my mind as the car circled the same building for what felt like an eternity. Finally, the driver spoke, his voice cold and devoid of emotion. "We're here." I looked out the window and realized we had indeed arrived at the Crimson Bar. I couldn't get out of the car fast enough. I paid the driver through the app and practically sprinted into the safety of the bar, dismissing the strange encounter as a figment of my imagination. The night passed in a blur of music, laughter, and drinks. As I immersed myself in the vibrant atmosphere of the bar, the strange Uber ride became a distant memory. I met new people, danced, and gradually forgot my unease. By the time the bar closed, I was feeling invigorated. I summoned another Uber to take me home. This time, the app assigned me a different driver, and a silver sedan arrived promptly. The driver was friendly, and we chatted as we navigated the rainy streets. As we drove, I recounted the bizarre experience from earlier in the evening. The driver listened intently, and when I finished, he shook his head. "You know, there's a legend about a haunted Uber driver in this city," he said, his voice tinged with amusement. I raised an eyebrow. "A haunted Uber driver? You can't be serious." "Oh, I am," he replied with a grin. "They say he's a ghost who lures unsuspecting passengers into his car and takes them on a never-ending ride, circling the same haunted building until they go mad or vanish forever." I laughed, dismissing it as an urban legend. But as we continued our journey, I couldn't shake the feeling of déjà vu. The same dilapidated building with broken windows and graffiti-covered walls appeared on the horizon once again. My heart began to race, and I turned to the driver, panic in my eyes. "Stop the car. Let me out." The driver obliged, pulling over to the side of the road. I practically leaped out of the car and stood there, drenched from the rain, watching as the silver sedan drove away. I was alone in the middle of nowhere, the rain pouring down around me. The abandoned building loomed in the distance, and I could hear faint whispers carried on the wind. I knew I had to get away from that place, but there were no other cars in sight, and my phone had no signal. Desperation set in as I walked along the desolate road, searching for any sign of civilization. The rain soaked through my clothes, and the whispers grew louder, filling my ears with eerie voices that seemed to call my name. Hours passed, and I stumbled upon an old, decrepit gas station. It looked abandoned, but I had no other choice. I entered cautiously, the floor creaking beneath my feet. The interior was in shambles, covered in dust and cobwebs. I called out, but there was no response. As I explored further, I noticed a door at the back of the station. It led to an underground chamber, and the whispers seemed to be coming from there. I descended the creaky staircase and found myself in a dimly lit room with walls covered in strange symbols and drawings. In the center of the room was an old, tattered leather-bound book. Curiosity overcame my fear, and I approached the book. Its pages were filled with incantations and rituals, all related to summoning spirits and controlling them. I realized with a sinking feeling that I had stumbled upon something dark and otherworldly. Suddenly, the whispers intensified, and a cold wind swept through the chamber. The pages of the book began to flip on their own, and an otherworldly force seemed to take hold of me. I tried to move, to escape, but I was paralyzed, my body no longer under my control. The room filled with an ethereal light, and a figure materialized before me. It was the same Uber driver from earlier, his face still hidden in shadows. But now, I could see his eyes, glowing with an eerie, unnatural light. "You summoned me," he hissed, his voice echoing through the chamber. "I didn't mean to," I pleaded, my voice barely a whisper. The driver's eyes bore into mine, and I felt a powerful presence probing my thoughts. Memories and fears flooded to the surface, and I realized that this entity fed on the fear of its victims. As I stood there, helpless, the driver's eyes narrowed with satisfaction. "You will ride with me forever," he whispered, and the world around me dissolved into darkness. And so, my friends, that is the story of my fateful encounter with the haunted Uber driver, a nightmarish journey into the supernatural realm that I can never forget. Whether it was a figment of my imagination or a true encounter with the paranormal, I'll never be certain. But one thing is for sure, I'll never look at an Uber ride the same way again, and I always keep an eye out for that dilapidated building on rainy nights, just in case. Story 4. The wind howled through the dark, empty streets of the city as I stood there, shivering, waiting for my Uber to arrive. It was the dead of night, and an eerie silence hung heavy in the air. I checked my phone impatiently, the screen casting a cold, pale glow on my face. The app confirmed that my ride was just minutes away. As I continued to wait, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease creeping over me. The streetlights flickered ominously, casting long, twisted shadows on the deserted sidewalk. I tried to shake off the feeling, attributing it to the late hour and my overactive imagination. Finally, a black sedan pulled up, and the driver's window slowly rolled down. A pair of piercing blue eyes met mine, sending a shiver down my spine. The driver had a clean-shaven face and a sinister smile that seemed out of place for a rideshare driver. "Are you my passenger?" he asked, his voice dripping with an unsettling charm. I hesitated for a moment, but the biting cold convinced me to get inside the car. I nodded and slid into the back seat. The interior was dimly lit, and the scent of leather and musk hung in the air. As the car began to move, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. "Where are we headed?" the driver asked, still wearing that unsettling grin. I gave him my destination, and he nodded. But instead of following the GPS route, he took a different turn down a narrow, dimly lit alleyway. Panic began to well up inside me. "Hey, the GPS says to go the other way," I stammered. The driver didn't respond. He simply continued driving deeper into the maze of shadowy streets. I fumbled for my phone, ready to call for help, but it slipped through my trembling fingers and clattered to the floor. Suddenly, the driver slammed on the brakes, sending me lurching forward. I looked out the window and realized we were in an abandoned industrial area, far from any signs of civilization. I was trapped. "What's going on?" I demanded, my voice quivering. The driver turned to me, his eyes now filled with a chilling malevolence. "You see, my dear passenger, this isn't your ordinary Uber ride. You're in for a little adventure tonight." Before I could react, he reached over and grabbed my wrist with an iron grip. I struggled to break free, but his strength was overwhelming. Panic surged through my veins as he pulled a syringe from his pocket. "No, please," I begged, my heart pounding. He injected the needle into my arm, and a cold numbness spread through my body. My vision blurred, and I could barely keep my eyes open. The last thing I saw before darkness claimed me was that sinister grin. I awoke in a dimly lit, underground chamber, my head throbbing with pain. I was bound to a cold, metal chair, my wrists and ankles secured by thick, unforgiving restraints. The room was filled with a nauseating, metallic scent, and a single flickering light bulb swung eerily from the ceiling. As my vision cleared, I saw the driver standing before me, his blue eyes burning with a sinister intensity. He was dressed in a black suit, and his smile had evolved into a malevolent smirk. "Welcome to my little world," he whispered, his voice sending shivers down my spine. You see, I don't just drive people around. I offer them a unique experience. I struggled against my restraints, my heart pounding in my chest. Let me go. You can't do this. He chuckled darkly. Oh, but I can, my dear. You're here now, and there's no escaping. He circled around me, his footsteps echoing in the cramped chamber. My eyes darted around, searching for any way out, but there was none. I was trapped, at the mercy of this deranged driver. He stopped behind me and leaned in close, his hot breath tickling my ear. You're going to play a little game with me, and if you win, I'll let you go. Lose, and, well, let's just say the consequences won't be pleasant. My mind raced, trying to come up with a plan, a way to outsmart him. But fear had a firm grip on me, and my thoughts were a jumbled mess. What kind of game? I managed to ask, my voice trembling. He produced a small box from his pocket and opened it to reveal a set of old, tarnished keys. I call it the key to freedom. There are 3 doors in this chamber, each leading to a different fate. Behind one door is your way out. Behind the other 2, well, you'll find out. He placed the keys on a nearby table and spun them, the metallic clinking sound filling the room. My heart raced as he gestured toward the doors. Choose, he said, his eyes fixed on me. I hesitated for a moment, then pointed to the door on the left. The driver grinned and picked up the corresponding key. Ah, a brave choice, he mused. Let's see if you've won. He unlocked the door, and it creaked open to reveal a pitch-black corridor. He gestured for me to enter. Go on, he urged, your fate awaits. With a deep breath, I stepped into the darkness, the door slamming shut behind me. The corridor was narrow, and my heart pounded in my chest as I fumbled my way forward. My fingers brushed against the cold, damp walls, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something lurked in the shadows. After what felt like an eternity, I reached the end of the corridor, my hands trembling as I tried the door handle. To my relief, it swung open, revealing a dimly lit room. I stepped inside, my eyes adjusting to the gloom. The room was filled with rows of old, dusty books and strange, arcane symbols etched into the walls. It seemed to be a forgotten library of sorts, but what caught my attention was a small wooden chest sitting on a pedestal in the center of the room. As I approached the chest, a sense of foreboding washed over me. I knew that my choice had led me here for a reason, and that reason was hidden within the chest. I hesitated for a moment, then slowly opened it. Inside, I found a stack of old, yellowed papers covered in bizarre writings and diagrams. It was a collection of ancient rituals, spells, and incantations, each more chilling than the last. My heart raced as I realized the gravity of what I had stumbled upon. I had unwittingly chosen a path that had led me to a realm of the occult, a place where dark forces lurked. The driver's twisted game had brought me face to face with the supernatural, and I knew I had to find a way out before it consumed me. But as I turned to leave the room, the door slammed shut with a deafening crash, and the lights flickered ominously. I was trapped once more, this time in a place where the line between the living and the dead was blurred, and the true horrors of the night were about to reveal themselves. My heart pounded in my chest as I turned back toward the chest of arcane secrets. The room felt oppressive, as if unseen eyes watched my every move. The pages of the ancient ritual books rustled in a sinister, whispered chorus. I knew that I had to find a way out of this room, away from the dark forces that threatened to consume me. I scanned the room for any clues, any means of escape. My eyes fell upon a candlestick on a nearby shelf, its candle still unlit. With trembling hands, I reached for it and lit the candle. Its flickering flame cast eerie shadows on the walls, revealing more of the cryptic symbols etched into the room's surface. As the light danced and swayed, I noticed that one symbol seemed to stand out, a circle with intricate runes surrounding it. I approached the symbol cautiously, my heart racing. It seemed significant, like a key to unlocking the room's secrets. With no other options, I traced my finger along the runes, feeling a strange energy pulse through them. Suddenly, the room began to change. The walls seemed to ripple, and the air grew thick with a palpable sense of anticipation. I watched in awe as the circle and runes I had touched came to life, glowing with an otherworldly light. In a flash of revelation, I realized that the room itself was a portal, a gateway to a realm of the supernatural. My choice had led me to this place, and now it was up to me to harness its power and find a way back to the real world. But as the portal's energy surged, I heard eerie whispers that seemed to emanate from the very walls. Shadowy figures materialized in the corners of the room, their eyes glowing with malevolence. They were the spirits of those who had ventured here before me, trapped for eternity. Panicking, I searched for a way to control the portal's power. My eyes fell on a line of text in one of the ritual books, a passage that seemed to offer guidance on closing the portal. With trembling hands, I recited the incantation, each word a struggle as I tried to match the ancient language. The room shook, and the spirits howled in agony as the portal's energy began to dissipate. The walls returned to their normal state, and the eerie whispers faded. The candle's flame extinguished itself, leaving the room in darkness once more. I stood there, panting and exhausted, but I had succeeded. I had closed the portal and banished the supernatural forces that had threatened to consume me. But I knew that I couldn't stay in this room forever. I had to find a way back to the driver and confront him. With newfound determination, I retraced my steps through the corridor and emerged back in the chamber where the driver awaited. He looked surprised to see me, his sinister grin wavering for the first time. "You've made it back," he said, his voice filled with a mixture of admiration and frustration. "I must admit, I didn't expect you to survive." I glared at him, my fear giving way to anger. "I won't let you get away with this. Let me go, now." He chuckled darkly. "Oh, my dear, I'm afraid the game isn't over yet. You still have one more choice to make." He gestured toward the remaining 2 doors, and I realized that my ordeal was far from finished. I had narrowly escaped the supernatural horrors of the portal, but the driver's twisted game still had one final challenge in store for me. As I approached the doors, a sinking feeling of dread washed over me. I knew that whatever lay behind them would test my courage and wit to the limit. But I was determined to see this through to the end, to outsmart the driver and escape his clutches once and for all. With a deep breath, I pointed to the door on the right, my heart pounding in my chest. The driver's sinister smile returned as he picked up the corresponding key. "Very well," he said, unlocking the door. "Let's see what fate has in store for you this time." As the door swung open, a rush of cold air greeted me, and I stepped through, determined to face whatever horrors lay ahead. The driver's wicked laughter followed me into the unknown, but I couldn't let fear consume me. I had come this far, and I was determined to win this twisted game and escape the clutches of the mysterious Uber driver. I found myself in a vast, desolate forest. Moonlight filtered through the dense canopy of trees, casting eerie, shifting shadows on the forest floor. The air was thick with an unsettling stillness, and an unnatural chill ran down my spine. I glanced back at the door through which I had entered, but it had vanished, leaving me with no way to turn back. The only way was forward, deeper into the heart of this ominous forest. As I ventured further, the forest seemed to come alive with sinister whispers. Strange, glowing eyes peered at me from the darkness, and I caught glimpses of shadowy figures darting between the trees. It was as if the very forest itself was watching and waiting. I pressed on, determined to find a way out of this nightmare. My senses were on high alert, and every rustling leaf, every distant sound, sent my heart racing. Hours seemed to pass as I stumbled through the forest, but time felt like a distorted, unpredictable concept in this otherworldly place. Suddenly, I came upon a clearing, and at its center stood a sinister-looking cabin. It was old, weathered, and seemed to exude an evil presence. It was as if the forest itself had birthed this malevolent structure. I hesitated, considering my options. The cabin might hold the key to my escape, but it also seemed like the very heart of the darkness that surrounded me. With a deep breath, I decided to enter, my curiosity and desperation driving me forward. The interior of the cabin was even more unsettling. Candles flickered on the walls, casting eerie, shifting shadows. Strange symbols adorned the floor, drawn in what appeared to be dried blood. And in the center of the room, a decrepit, leather-bound tome lay open on an altar. As I approached the tome, my heart sank. The pages were filled with horrifying depictions of rituals, sacrifices, and unspeakable acts. It was a book of dark magic, and I knew that touching it would come with grave consequences. But I had no other choice. I needed to find a way out of this forest, away from the sinister Uber driver and his twisted game. With trembling hands, I reached for the book, and as soon as my fingers made contact, the room began to shake violently. The candles went out, plunging the cabin into darkness. Whispers filled the air, growing louder and more sinister by the second. I felt a presence, a malevolent force, closing in on me. In a desperate bid to escape, I recited the incantation from the book, hoping that it would somehow lead me out of this nightmare. As the words left my lips, the room erupted in a blinding flash of light. When the light subsided, I found myself back in the underground chamber, facing the sinister Uber driver once more. He looked furious, his sinister grin now twisted into a snarl. You were not supposed to return," he hissed. I stood my ground, the experiences in the forest and the cabin having steeled my resolve. "I won't be a pawn in your sick game any longer. Let me go, now." The driver's anger gave way to a cold, calculating gaze. "Very well," he said. "You've won. But remember, you chose this path, and you can never truly escape it." With a wave of his hand, the restraints binding me vanished, and the room began to fade away. I found myself back on the deserted street where this nightmare had begun. I stumbled out of the car, my heart still pounding, and watched as the black sedan disappeared into the night. The driver was gone, leaving me to wonder if he had ever been real or just a twisted figment of my imagination. As I walked away from that nightmarish Uber ride, I knew that I had survived a harrowing ordeal. The choices I had made had led me through a night filled with supernatural horrors, and I had emerged on the other side, forever changed. But the driver's words lingered in my mind, a haunting reminder that the darkness was never far away. I had escaped his twisted game, but the true nature of the world remained a mystery, a place where the line between reality and nightmare could blur at any moment. And so, with a newfound sense of caution and a deeper understanding of the unknown, I walked away from that cursed street, vowing never to forget the horrors of the midnight ride.